Hey there, it's Mr. Martin. Today we are going to be looking at some of the procedural stuff for how to complete your Termite Lab report. And so I'm on the Moodle page. You can see underneath Unit 1 Biochemistry. We have the Termite Lab resources here. So this was the actual document that you were given. And then there are two documents underneath that I'm going to talk about a little bit today. The website that we're going to be using, this one right here, is called LabWrite. The website comes to us from the University of North Carolina State, and I know that a lot of different colleges are starting to use this website as a resource for how to do a formal lab report. So we've already done the lab, so pre-lab, in-lab stuff already taken care of. We're going to go to the post-lab section, and under this you can see there are a couple different types of labs that they've got here. We're looking at the self guide over here on the side, and then you want to also probably click on this tab over here under Student Designed Lab Report, because that's what you did, is you designed the termite lab. So when you click on that, it comes up with all sorts of information on the different sections that you're going to be needing. I'm actually going to adjust ever so slightly what you need in terms of those resources. But you'll also notice the lab reports, section 1, 2, they're not in the order that I would expect you to put them in. On my checklist, I do have them in order that you would need them in, but they suggest starting with the methods because that's what you did first. And so if you look at what you did first, you designed the lab and ran it, this should be pretty much already done. You know what you did. So you're describing the lab procedure here, and it tells you a little blurb here in terms of what is needed. And then if you need more help with this section, there is all sorts of helpful hints on what you should include and how to organize your methods section. The other resource that's going to be very important for you is the lab report checklist. And so if you click on that link, up will pop this Word document. And this is what my expectations are personally for the Termite Lab report. This can be done as a group and can be turned in as one whole group with everybody's name on it, or you could decide to do this individually if you don't have time to coordinate your efforts. But you can see I've put this in order of what I expect to see, starting with a title and then followed by the introduction, materials and methods section, results, discussion, and then this is just kind of your overall presentation of the material. Not a presentation in front of class, but just presentation of the material in the lab report format. You will notice that from the LabWrite website there are a few sections missing. I am not expecting you to do an abstract, and I am not expecting you to do a conclusion section. I just find too much redundancy in those sections, and so we'll start with this kind of format this year. Title is pretty straightforward. Give it a creative title, but that gets across the content of the material, and then move on quickly. The introduction is what opens up the lab and kind of gets the reader, in this case it's going to be mostly me, gets the reader understanding what your lab is all about. In this section you will be providing sufficient background information, and so this is where you need to do a little research on termites, their behavior, maybe their use of pheromones, and in the not too distant future I'll be opening up some resources on Moodle for you to use, as well as just your general background knowledge on how to research using your favorite search engine. So you're going to put that stuff into written text format. I expect the introduction to probably be about 2 to 3 paragraphs in length. You'll also then present the goals of the lab, the major objectives, what were you trying to do. You might also set up here kind of what were some of your observations that you made initially, either in freshman biology when you were working with termites or at the beginning of this lab this year. In addition to the objectives and some of the observations that you made, you also want to put together your statement or question about what you're going to be testing, so that we all are aware of that. And then you want to clearly state your hypothesis. Best way to do that would be in the if, then, because format. The because part is your sufficient and logical reasoning supporting the hypothesis. So that should probably take about 2 to 3 paragraphs in itself, and then in addition to that, from the extra lab stuff we were doing on termite gut symbiosis, I am going to ask you to maybe add just 1 paragraph. You can put pictures in if you'd like, including a little information on termite symbiosis. I know it has nothing to do with the behavior relating to pens, but it is something that we also included in lab. There's no procedural stuff that you have to include further on, as you didn't design an experiment based on this, but you did at least find some termite gut symbionts, and you can include some of that information then here in the introduction, just setting up the lab. I'm not going to read through the materials and methods section in detail, but this should be written in paragraph format, not in 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. So I would like it to be in a paragraph format instead of a bulleted list. And so this says this could be in a bulleted list format. I am going to be expecting you to have it in a paragraph format, including the key materials. List that as just part of the lab. As you talk about, we did this, then we did this, then we did this. Just discuss the materials throughout. You don't have to list them in any kind of list. You do want to make sure you give enough detail so that somebody else could repeat it. So to say they follow a blue line, you need to tell me a little bit about the structure of that blue line, maybe the type of pen you are using. Give me as much detail as possible. The results section is sometimes where people struggle. They just want to toss down a data table and be done with it. But in a good college level lab report, the results section has writing with it as well. So you begin with a sentence or two describing the overall findings, and then you go on to including tables and graphs and things like that. We may also have the opportunity to put some simplistic statistics in at the beginning of the year here, finding things like the mean, the median, the mode, if that stuff is important to trying to look for patterns or trends. Each visual that you have then should also include a verbal description. So a little bit about, whoa, what does that table show us? What is that graph giving us? And you're just stating what the results were. And you can notice here at the end, you want to avoid any explanations of why or conclusions about the data in the results section. You're just stating what you observed in terms of the data. The discussion section should be the next place where you spend quite a bit of time. You are going to begin with a statement of whether or not your results support or do not support the hypothesis. People always want to use the word, my data proved I was right, but you're not proving anything. Maybe your data does support that the termites spent more time with red ink than with blue ink, but you didn't prove anything with 10 to 30 termites tested. So we want to use the word support or do not support. Instead of do not support, you could also use the word refute. You want to provide sufficient logical explanation, including possible sources of errors, ways to improve the lab, things that you would have done differently next time. You also, and this is the one that a lot of people miss, is you want to compare your results to what other people did. Now maybe somebody didn't do the exact same lab in class here, but I am confident that there are several resources online of people doing this lab as well. And so I would expect you to do a little bit of research and see how it compared. And if it's not the exact same lab, you can still look for some similar patterns. Like if you went with pen color, you could find somebody else with pen color. If you went with something to do with how quickly they could find a resource like wood that they were looking for, maybe for a food source, see how you can incorporate what somebody else has done in terms of termite tracking behavior or something like that. Pertinent considerations appropriate to the discussion. Just as you come across things in your research, I would expect you to cite that information and include it in the discussion. And so there's a lot more out there. Might be additional questions that you had or additional interesting things that you came across that you might say, boy, I wish I would have known this before I did the lab, because then I would have done this, this, or this in my design process. And the very last thing I'd make sure you include is a discussion about these two terms, taxis versus kinesis, and your termites. It is something dealing with termite behavior, and as long as we're doing a lab kind of dealing with behavior here, let's see if we can include these terms. That would take a little bit of time on your part to look it up and find what those things mean. In terms of presentation, spell things correctly, use correct grammar, label your different sections appropriately, and lastly, you want to make sure that you do include some sort of a reference page. So citations and references are there and should be used. I don't have a number that you should be using of resources, but 3 to 5 references on a reference list would be appropriate, and I think APA format would be the best. As always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to come and see me and I will give you deadlines as needed in class. Thanks.